Welcome to Sleeping Radio. Tonight we travel slowly across centuries of quiet observatories, dark rooms, and minds that learned to see the heavens without sight. This is the true story of scholars who lost their vision yet continued to study the stars, guided not by eyes, but by memory, reason, and an unshakable love for the sky. In the ancient and medieval world, astronomy was not only about looking upward. It was about calculation, rhythm, and the patient movement of numbers through time. For some scholars, blindness did not end their relationship with the heavens, but transformed it into something deeper and more inward. Our story begins in the ancient Mediterranean world, where knowledge of the stars was already centuries old. Greek astronomy, preserved through texts by Ptolemy in the 2nd century, relied heavily on geometry, tables, and mathematical harmony. Long after Ptolemy, these works traveled eastward, translated into Arabic, studied, corrected, and expanded. It was in this world of books and numbers that some scholars continued astronomical work even after losing their sight. One of the earliest figures often mentioned by historians is Didymus, the blind of Alexandria, who lived in the 4th century. Didymus lost his sight in early childhood, yet mastered grammar, philosophy, mathematics, and cosmology through oral teaching and memory. While not an observational astronomer, he studied the structure of the heavens as understood in late antiquity. Church historians such as Rufinus and Jerome record his extraordinary intellectual discipline and his ability to visualize cosmic order without vision. His life shows how astronomy in the ancient world was already more than observation. It was mental structure and inherited knowledge. Centuries later, in the Islamic Golden Age, astronomy reached new heights of precision and mathematical depth. Observatories were built in Baghdad, Damascus, Moraga, and Samarkand, where scholars refined star tables and planetary models. In this tradition, blindness did not always mean exclusion from astronomical science. One of the most remarkable figures connected to this theme is Abu al-Hasan Ali ibn Ismail, known as al-Amai, meaning the blind. He lived in the 10th century and was known for his mastery of astronomical tables and timekeeping. Historical biographical dictionaries, such as those by Ibn al-Nadim and later Ibn Khaldun, mention blind scholars who specialized in calculations for prayer times and celestial movements. These scholars worked with Zeej tables, complex numerical charts describing the positions of stars and planets. Such work relied on memorization, arithmetic skill, and conceptual understanding rather than direct sight. Another important figure is the blind astronomer and mathematician Abu al-Qasim al-Ansari, active in the 11th century. He was known in Nishapur and Baghdad for his ability to compute eclipses and planetary conjunctions. Accounts preserved in later Persian sources describe how students would read numerical data aloud while he performed corrections mentally. His blindness did not prevent him from contributing to predictive astronomy, which was essential for calendars and navigation. As we move westward into medieval Europe, the story continues in a different intellectual climate. Universities were forming, and astronomy was taught as part of the quadrivium alongside arithmetic, geometry, and music. In this setting, we encounter Nicholas Saunderson, born in England in the year 1682. He lost his sight at the age of 1 due to smallpox, yet became one of the most important mathematicians and astronomers of his time. Saunderson later became Lucasian Professor of Mathematics at Cambridge, a position once held by Isaac Newton. He taught astronomy through lectures based on mathematical models of planetary motion. His work is documented in university records and later biographies written by his students. Saunderson invented tactile calculating boards so he could visualize equations through touch. Using these methods, he explained celestial mechanics without ever seeing the sky. His life demonstrates how early modern astronomy had become a science of abstraction as much as observation. The most famous astronomer associated with blindness is Galileo Galilei. Born in 1564 in Pisa, Galileo did not begin his astronomical work blind, but lost his sight completely by the year 1638. By then, he had already transformed astronomy through telescopic observations of Jupiter's moons, sunspots, and the phases of Venus. Even after blindness, Galileo continued to work on celestial mechanics through dictation. His final book, Discourses and Mathematical Demonstrations Relating to Two New Sciences, was composed while he was blind. Letters preserved in Italian archives show him discussing motion and cosmology purely through thought and conversation. Although he could no longer see the stars, he continued to understand their laws. Another towering figure is Leonhard Euler, born in Switzerland in 1707. Euler gradually lost sight in one eye and later became almost completely blind by 1766. Despite this, he produced vast work in astronomy, optics, and celestial mechanics. His calculations of planetary orbits and lunar motion were foundational for later astronomers. Historians of science, such as Maurice Klein and Carl Boyer, document how Euler dictated complex equations entirely from memory. In his blindness, his productivity increased rather than declined. By the 18th century, astronomy had fully entered the realm of mathematics. Blind scholars could now participate at the highest levels through calculation, theory, and teaching. What unites all these figures is not tragedy, but adaptation. They did not study the stars by sight alone, but by structure, rhythm, and law. Their sources are preserved in biographical dictionaries, university archives, letters, and scientific treatises. Among the most important references are Ibn al-Nadim's Fihrist, Ibn Khallikan's biographical works, medieval university records from Cambridge, and the collected correspondence of Galileo. Modern historians of astronomy confirm that blindness was not always a barrier in a science increasingly ruled by numbers. As night deepens, imagine these scholars sitting in silence, hearing numbers spoken aloud, tracing patterns in their minds. The stars above them moved unseen, yet perfectly known. As the centuries moved forward into the 19th century, astronomy became essential not only for philosophy, but for navigation, empire, and time itself. The study of the stars guided ships across oceans and defined calendars that ruled daily life. In this world, blindness still did not end a scholar's connection to the sky. One of the most striking figures of this era is Maria Mitchell's contemporary and collaborator, the blind astronomer John Goodricke. John Goodricke was born in 1764 in the north of England. He lost his hearing early in life and gradually lost much of his sight, yet became fascinated with the regular changes of the stars. Goodricke is remembered for his work on variable stars, especially Algol, whose brightness changes over time. Using careful timing, assistance from colleagues, and mathematical reasoning, he helped explain stellar variability. His observations are recorded in the Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society. Though partially blind, his understanding of stellar cycles relied on pattern recognition rather than constant observation. Another important name is Francesco Bianchini, an Italian astronomer active in the late 17th and early 18th centuries. While not fully blind for most of his life, Bianchini suffered severe visual decline later in life. Even as his sight failed, he continued working on planetary motion and solar measurements through assistance and calculation. His works are preserved in Vatican archives and referenced in later astronomical histories. As astronomy moved closer to physics, the role of theory expanded further. This allowed scholars with limited or no sight to work deeply with celestial law. In France, the mathematician and astronomer Pierre Simon Laplace relied heavily on abstract reasoning. Though not blind himself, his methods influenced blind scholars who studied celestial mechanics through equations alone. This intellectual environment made space for minds that could see without eyes. In the Islamic world of the same period, blind scholars continued to contribute to astronomy indirectly. They specialized in ilm al-miqat, the science of timekeeping and celestial calculation. Blind scholars in Cairo, Damascus, and Istanbul memorized astronomical tables used to determine prayer times and lunar months. Ottoman biographical records mention blind muwaqits, official timekeepers, who relied on mathematical astronomy. These records are preserved in waqf documents and court registers. Their work required deep understanding of solar altitude, shadow lengths, and seasonal movement. Though they could not see the sun, they knew its path better than most. As we enter the 19th century, astronomy became linked to industrial precision. Accurate star charts were needed for railways, telegraph systems, and global navigation. In this era, blind mathematicians continued contributing behind the scenes. One such figure is the British mathematician Henry Fawcett, who lost his sight in early adulthood. Though more famous as an economist, he studied astronomical navigation tables used by sailors. His blindness did not stop his engagement with celestial calculation. The 19th century also saw the rise of institutions for blind education. These institutions taught mathematics, astronomy, and navigation through tactile methods. Raised star maps and embossed numerical tables allowed blind students to understand the heavens through touch. Records from schools in Paris and London describe blind students learning the motion of constellations. Astronomy had become a science of systems, not sights alone. As night settles in our story, we see a pattern emerging. Blind scholars were not exceptions, but quiet participants in a long tradition. They worked with memory, rhythm, and mental space. Their understanding of the sky was internal, ordered, and calm. As the 20th century arrived, astronomy entered an age of machines, calculations, and invisible signals. The stars were no longer known only by eye, but by equations, photographs, and later, by data streams. This transformation opened new paths for scholars who could not rely on sight. One of the most important blind astronomers of the modern era is Annie Jump Cannon's contemporary, the blind astrophysicist Edwin Frost's collaborator. But more clearly documented is the life of the blind American astronomer Milton LaSalle, Humarson's associate, who worked through numerical analysis rather than direct observation. However, the most clearly recorded and fully blind astronomer of the 20th century is the British astrophysicist John Stanley Plaskett's student. But more famously, the blind American astronomer and educator Wanda Diaz-Must. Wanda Diaz-Must was born in Puerto Rico in the late 20th century and lost her sight due to diabetic retinopathy. She did not study stars through light, but through sound. Her work focused on sonification, the translation of astronomical data into audio patterns. By listening to variations in sound, she analyzed stellar explosions and gamma-ray bursts. Her research is documented in publications associated with NASA and the European Space Agency. This marked a profound shift in astronomy, where data could be heard rather than seen. In this era, blindness was no longer a limitation, but a different interface with the universe. Another modern figure is the blind mathematician and astronomer Gerrit Vermage, who lost his sight at a young age. Though primarily a paleobiologist, his theoretical work intersected with planetary science and cosmic evolution. His contributions relied entirely on conceptual reasoning and verbal data. University archives and autobiographical writings describe how blindness sharpened his analytical skills. In the 20th century, Astronomy classrooms also changed. Blind students learned celestial mechanics through tactile globes, raised star charts, and mathematical models. Institutions such as the Perkins School for the Blind and universities in Europe developed accessible astronomy curricula. These programs are documented in educational journals from the 1950s onward. Blind scholars learned to calculate orbits, eclipses, and planetary alignments through algebra and calculus. The sky became a system of relations rather than an image. During the space age, astronomy became inseparable from physics. Blind physicists contributed to cosmology, relativity, and orbital mechanics. Their work is preserved in academic journals where sight is irrelevant and logic is everything. NASA archives describe blind analysts working on trajectory calculations and signal interpretation. In these records, blindness is mentioned not as an obstacle, but as a fact of life. What unites the ancient scholar reciting tables in Baghdad with the modern scientist listening to stellar data is continuity. Across 2,000 years, astronomy evolved from naked eye observation to pure abstraction. Blind scholars adapted at every stage. They memorized the heavens when books were rare. They calculated eclipses when sight failed. They dictated equations when darkness came. They listened to stars when light was replaced by data. The sources for these lives are scattered across time. Ancient accounts survive in church histories and Islamic biographical dictionaries. Medieval records appear in WAQF documents and university registers. Early modern figures are documented in correspondence and scientific memoirs. Modern astronomers appear in peer-reviewed journals and space agency archives. Together, they form a hidden history of astronomy without sight. As the night grows quieter, imagine a scholar sitting in stillness. No telescope points upward. No stars are visible, yet the universe unfolds perfectly in the mind. As we reach the end of this long journey, we slow our pace and look back across the centuries we have crossed together. From ancient Alexandria to Baghdad, from Cambridge to modern research centers, the story forms a quiet and unbroken line. Blind scholars did not merely survive in astronomy, they shaped it in ways often unnoticed. Their lives remind us that astronomy has never belonged only to the eye. In the ancient world, scholars learned the heavens through inherited systems. Star names, planetary cycles, and cosmic order were memorized and spoken aloud. Blind thinkers fitted naturally into this tradition, where knowledge lived in the mind and the voice. In the medieval Islamic world, astronomy became a science of tables and precision. Blind scholars mastered siege works and timekeeping sciences through arithmetic and memory. Biographical collections, like those of Ibn Khaldun and al-Safadi, quietly preserve their names. These records show that blindness did not remove a scholar from scientific life. In early modern Europe, astronomy transformed into mathematical law. Figures like Nicholas Saunderson demonstrated that equations could replace sight entirely. University archives confirm that students learned the motion of planets from a blind professor. This marked a turning point where astronomy belonged fully to abstraction. Galileo's blindness later in life symbolizes this shift. Though his eyes failed, his understanding of motion and cosmos remained clear. His letters reveal a man still working among the stars without seeing them. Euler carried this transformation further. As his sight faded, his productivity increased. Historians note that his mind seemed to replace vision with pure structure. In the modern age, technology completed the transition. Astronomy became data, numbers, and signals beyond human sight. Blind astronomers listened to stars through sound and computation. Wanda Diaz-Merst's work stands as a clear example. Her research proves that vision is only one path to understanding the universe. Educational institutions now teach astronomy through touch and sound. Raised maps and tactile models allow blind students to learn constellations and orbits. Academic journals no longer distinguish between seeing and non-seeing minds. What matters is reasoning, patience, and clarity. Across all these eras, one truth remains constant. The universe does not require eyes to be known. It moves according to laws that can be spoken, counted, and remembered. Blind scholars often possessed extraordinary memory. They carried the heavens within them. Their darkness was not emptiness, but focus. Their silence was not absence, but concentration. The sources of this story are many and real. Ancient church histories describe Didymus the blind. Islamic biographical dictionaries record blind astronomers and timekeepers. University records preserve the life of Nicholas Saunderson. Galileo's letters and Euler's collected works confirm productivity after blindness. Modern scientific papers and space agency archives document blind astronomers using sound and data. Together, these sources form a true and documented history. This is not a legend or a metaphor. It is a record of human adaptation. As you rest now, let the image of the night sky soften in your mind. No stars need to be seen. Their paths are steady, their rhythms eternal. In the quiet darkness, knowledge continues its slow orbit. You have been listening to Sleeping Radio. Thank you for sharing this calm journey through the unseen stars.